Before the boardroom. Before the glass walls and logo mugs. Before the silent elevators and quarterly reports, there was a garage with bad insulation and no heat. There was a man with sore knees, cracked fingers, and a rented folding table pressed against a wall of exposed brick. The desk lamp didn't quite light the corners of the room, but it was enough to see the screen. Enough to dream. His name was Elijah. And before anyone knew it, before his name sat on filings, contracts, or rejected VC decks, it lived only in the margins of napkins and whiteboards. He wasn't born into tech. He wasn't taught by legacy. No uncle ran a fund. No cousin coded for Google. What he had was time, calloused instinct, and a quiet obsession with building something that could outlast him. He didn't believe in disruption. He believed in infrastructure, systems that solved problems the world ignored because they didn't feel them. Elijah's first build wasn't an app. It was a platform designed not to dazzle but to function. It automated small business payments for vendors who couldn't afford enterprise solutions. No press. No praise. Just pure utility. He spent his nights testing it line by line, debugging with a second-hand monitor balanced on a stack of milk crates. His savings vanished fast. Then his car. Then most of his clothes. He sold his television for a server. He pawned his watch to file the LLC. When investors laughed at the pitch too niche, too messy, too plain, he adjusted the product, not his voice. And slowly, something clicked. The platform caught traction among cleaning companies, food trucks, corner stores, the businesses no one designed for. They weren't sexy, but they were loyal. When bugs happened, Elijah answered calls himself. When features failed, he rebuilt overnight. He didn't build a brand. He built a need. And when the time came to grow, he made one mistake. He let others in. Not out of desperation, but trust. He needed capital. He needed operations. He needed people who knew how to build teams and scale. And when they came, with their tailored suits, strategic language, and glowing promises, he welcomed them in. They called it a partnership. But it was a dilution. The contracts were tight. The shares split clean. But he was stretched. He stayed in the code while they moved through offices. He stayed up while they flew out. Slowly, meetings stopped including him. Branding changed. Co-founder became legacy contributor. Then, silence. He didn't fight. He worked. Until one day, the company moved to a new building, glass tower, downtown, minimalist furniture, and full-floor views, and his badge stopped working at the front door. They said it was a mistake. Then said nothing at all. He watched from outside as the product he built was repackaged, resold, renamed. He saw his mission statement paraphrased in slick investor decks. He saw executives present his roadmap like it had fallen from their mouths fully formed. And then, one morning, he saw the article. "We've outgrown our roots." A quote from the current CEO. The photo showed the boardroom. And not a single face in it looked like the man who had drawn the original database schema by hand. Elijah didn't break. He downloaded the image. Saved it. Opened the file. And began again. He didn't write an email. He didn't write a tweet. He wrote a plan. 6 months later, he bought out the third largest shareholder of the company. Privately. For weeks after that, he acquired the voting proxy of another, an early investor who never forgot what Elijah built. 2 months more, and he negotiated an equity switch with a venture partner drowning in over-leveraged startups. He stayed invisible. Until he held the paperwork. Until his name was back at the top. Not as co-founder. As the owner. And when the transaction cleared, when his signature hit the transfer clause, he did what no one expected. He showed up. Not with cameras. Not with a lawyer. Just a folder. A steady walk. And the memory of 1,000 late nights where no one believed this would matter. He didn't come back for revenge. He came back for his seat. Because the boardroom didn't make the founder. The founder made the boardroom. The building was different now. Polished. Sanitized. A glass monolith that rose like confidence from the city's grid, hiding its origin behind modern panels and valet smiles. Inside, the lobby smelled of recycled ambition and eucalyptus. The front desk was automated. The security guards wore suits sharper than what Elijah used to wear to pitch meetings. But it was the hallway that stung the most. The one just outside the boardroom. Elijah stood in it now not as a ghost, but as proof. Every light above him buzzed quietly, sterile, and timed. The walls, white and spotless, displayed awards for innovation, framed quotes from articles, names that claimed authorship over work he had done when no one else showed up. Every detail screamed disassociation. They had scrubbed the past from the space, rewritten him out of the company's memory like an inconvenient draft. A young receptionist walked toward him with a headset looped across her cheek and a tablet in hand. Her eyes moved quickly, assessing his presence like a misplaced delivery. Her tone was polite, professional, and indifferent. She asked if he had a meeting. He didn't answer. She asked again, softer now, assuming he hadn't heard her. Still, he said nothing. Instead, he handed her a folder. Not a thick one. Not flashy. No branding. Just 3 pages. She opened it, eyes scanning out of obligation until she saw the signatures. And the clause. And the timestamp. Her posture changed. Subtle but clear. Not fear. Recognition. Behind her, a man in a tailored gray suit turned the corner. Operations Director. Elijah remembered hiring him fresh out of grad school back when their office was 2 rented desks and a folding table. Now, the man barely glanced his way. Just stopped beside the receptionist and asked, briskly, what the problem was. She handed him the folder without a word. He flipped through it. Blinked once. Twice. Then asked Elijah if he was lost. The audacity didn't surprise him. Not anymore. The man motioned to security. 2 guards approached, calm but firm. One placed a hand lightly on Elijah's elbow. It wasn't aggressive. Just practiced. This wasn't the first time they'd escorted someone out of a space they didn't belong in. The moment crystallized. Sir, this hallway is for executives only. Please stay out of the boardroom. The sentence landed without weight. But Elijah turned. Not to explain. To point. At the line on the 2nd page of the folder. The one labeled Ownership and Control, Article 12b, the clause that granted him unrestricted access to all executive areas, including full voting rights and the power to restructure leadership at will. The guard read it. The operations director read it. Then tried to laugh. But the sound never came out. Because the clause was real. The ink was dry. And the name printed at the bottom wasn't just Elijah's. It was the company's legal origin. He walked past them. Not hurried. Not smug. Just present. His boots didn't squeak. They didn't echo. They landed like punctuation. When he reached the door, it opened without resistance. Inside, the boardroom was full. 12 executives sat around the table mid-presentation. Charts danced on the screen. An intern stood awkwardly by the coffee tray, not sure if he was supposed to stay. Elijah stepped in. No one recognized him at first. Too many years. Too many filters of assumption. One woman leaned toward the man beside her, whispering a question. A younger executive smirked, thinking someone had wandered in from the janitorial wing. Then silence. The CEO, seated at the head of the table, rose. Slowly. He had been there for 5 years. Replaced Elijah's title without ceremony. Used his roadmap as a launchpad. Used his silence as consent. He said Elijah's name. Once. Softly. The room shifted. Some executives turned their eyes downward. Others stiffened. The intern by the coffee tray froze in place. Elijah placed the folder on the table. The CEO reached for it with steady hands, but they trembled slightly. As he read, the flush drained from his face. Not just at the ownership confirmation, but at what followed. Clause 12c. Immediate boardroom reinstatement of founding member. All votes frozen until confirmation. All decisions void without his signature. He looked up, and Elijah was already sitting. In the chair that once belonged to him. The silence held. Because no one knew what to say to the man they had erased. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He opened his notebook and began to write. Not a speech, a restructure. Because he hadn't returned to remember the boardroom. He had returned to rebuild it. The chair felt familiar, not in comfort but in weight. Elijah remembered the first version of it. A second-hand swivel with uneven legs that scraped against plywood. Now it was a leather-backed ergonomic throne designed to scream control. But what mattered wasn't the seat. It was the silence that followed his presence in it. The CEO had returned to his spot, his voice thinner, his posture uneven. He didn't speak. No one did. Elijah sat with a page open in front of him. A pen rested between his fingers, unmoving. He wasn't taking notes. He was observing. Not the graphs, the slides, or the corporate lingo that filled the air like fog. He was watching posture, tone, deference, discomfort. This wasn't a meeting. It was an autopsy. Each executive spoke as if auditioning. Voices filled with rehearsed alignment. They used phrases like synergy, vertical optimization, and forward-facing strategy. None of it mattered. Elijah had heard better ideas from vendors and engineers during lunch breaks in the early days. Back then, innovation wasn't language. It was survival. He listened. Then he closed the notebook. And the real meeting began. No announcements. No transitions. Just a breath and the first sentence. Who here remembers why we started this? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because none of them were there. The oldest executive had joined 2 years after the first seed round. The youngest hadn't been born when Elijah wrote the prototype in a free code editor on a borrowed laptop. He didn't wait for a reply. He unrolled a blueprint. Not digital. Paper. Thick. Coffee-stained. Smudged in the corners with fingerprints of a different life. It was the original infrastructure map of the company, hand-drawn, annotated, refined over years of grind. It still bore the scratch marks from a night spent redesigning the back end after a catastrophic crash. Still had initials in the corners from the 2 engineers who helped him for free in exchange for burritos and bus fare. He laid it on the table. The silence cracked. One executive asked where it came from. Another asked why it mattered. Elijah didn't answer either. Instead, he pointed to a small circle on the diagram labeled Ethics Core. It wasn't a feature. It was a philosophy. The company had once been built on solving real problems for small, underserved businesses, making payment systems accessible, secure, and free of manipulation. The board now steered that system into licensing deals with the very corporations that had exploited those clients. Elijah didn't need to say what was broken. He pointed to what had been erased. And then he gave them the plan. Not a pitch. A directive. 3 verticals shut down. 2 partnerships dissolved. Executive salaries frozen. Dividends rerouted to infrastructure and user reinvestment. A full month dedicated to platform repair, not PR. There was a pause. Tension climbed the walls like humidity. Then the pushback began. One man called it impractical. Another said the markets wouldn't understand. A woman in HR warned it would alienate stakeholders. Elijah listened, then reached for a document beside him, an internal analysis he had commissioned in secret the moment his voting rights returned. It outlined every instance of cost-cutting that benefited executives at the expense of product quality. It showed graphs, names, timestamps. He passed it down the table. No words, just data. When it reached the end, no one spoke. He circled one number at the top corner. $1.2 million. That's what the company had spent in 1 fiscal year on bonuses tied to growth that never touched users. The CEO cleared his throat, then stopped. He knew. It was over. Elijah stood. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened a second folder. Inside, a signed resolution. Unanimous or not, his controlling share gave him power to restructure the board. 6 seats dissolved. 3 new seats created. Applicants open to team members below management level. Decision effective immediately. The board sat still as statues. This wasn't a debate. It was a correction. Elijah stepped out of the room. Not in anger. In clarity. He didn't come back for power. He came back for the memory that lived in the floorboards, the unseen, unpaid work, the silent nights of architecture. He didn't want to own the company. He wanted to restore its soul. And sometimes, to do that, you had to remind people who built the house. Elijah walked the hallways like a memory reawakening in its own body. No badge, no staff trailing him. Just his presence, quiet, deliberate, measured. His name was no longer missing from the walls, but he didn't ask for a plaque. He didn't care about symbolic apologies. He was here to correct something deeper than perception. He was here to fix the way the company remembered itself. The glass walls reflected the version of the business they had turned it into. Clean, clinical, and cold. Conference rooms named after abstract concepts, synergy, vision, growth. But Elijah didn't sit in them. He found an empty corner in the oldest part of the building, the floor they never renovated, where the carpet still bore the coffee stains of interns and where the light switches flickered when used too quickly. That became his office. He never told anyone. They just noticed. No announcements. No formal schedule. He showed up with a laptop, a notebook, and a thermos. Some of the older engineers remembered him. The younger ones didn't. They whispered. Wondered. Was he a consultant? An advisor? A story someone forgot to tell? Then came the changes. Not sweeping decrees. Small things. The meeting rooms, once filtered by department rank, were open to all. A new door code appeared on the bulletin board, a shared space for anyone who wanted to build after hours. One night, a junior product designer working late heard someone behind her quietly fix a bug she'd been stuck on for days. She turned and saw Elijah at a screen, debugging like it was instinct. He didn't introduce himself. He just nodded once and left. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't have to. The word spread. The founder was back, not to take over, but to realign. Then the ghosts began to vanish. The inefficiencies. The policies designed to hoard credit. The toxic middle management layers. Elijah introduced a system of lateral project reviews where junior staff anonymously reviewed senior output. Not as judgment, but as calibration. Some scoffed. Others froze. But it stayed. And in time, it worked. In a single month, 2 innovation teams launched prototypes that had been shelved for over a year. Elijah approved both with a one-line email: build, test, repeat. He didn't attend investor calls. He didn't sit on press panels. He sat with the QA team, learning the new architecture from the inside out. One morning, an executive found him sweeping up spilled takeout in the break room. The man offered to call janitorial. Elijah just shrugged. "We clean what we care about," he said. It wasn't a quote. It was a reminder. Later that quarter, a competitor launched a clone of their flagship tool, faster, cheaper, louder. Panic spread across the upper tier. The new leadership team convened an emergency strategy session. Elijah didn't attend. Instead, he gathered 5 people, 2 engineers, a product intern, and 2 users from the original platform. They built something in 3 weeks. When he presented it, it wasn't a defensive move. It was evolution. Simpler. More ethical. User first. No manipulation. No unnecessary add-ons. The release changed everything. The competitor lost traction in 3 days. And Elijah never brought it up again. Because vindication wasn't the goal. Alignment was. Meanwhile, HR noticed something unusual. Resignation rates dropped. Anonymous employee feedback improved. People started clocking in early, not out of fear, but investment. They cared again. And it wasn't because of stock options or incentives. It was because they were being seen. He wasn't rebuilding a company. He was retraining its memory. Then came the audit. A legal review tied to the original founder's agreement. One clause buried, ignored, stated that the original founder, if reinstated as voting shareholder, could initiate cultural realignment through executive referendum. It was outdated, unenforced, but valid. Elijah invoked it. With it, he launched the core principle archive, a living document system where any employee could submit examples of company actions that violated the original mission. It scared some, freed others, because accountability was no longer filtered by title. And somewhere in the shadows of the building's clean lines and code bases, the old company, the one built by sweat and belief, was waking up again. It didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be real. The legal department didn't expect him to read the full documents. But Elijah had always read everything. Not because he distrusted, but because he remembered what it felt like to be erased between the lines. Buried in clauses. Reduced to footnotes in the very story he authored. So when he asked for the original articles of incorporation, they were printed reluctantly, over 200 pages, boxed, double-checked. He took them home. Spent the weekend in silence. And on page 87, under Exhibit B, Section 12, he found it. The legacy clause. Buried beneath formatting errors and overwritten amendments, it had survived untouched because no one thought it mattered. It was written in the company's infancy, a clause that had been rushed through by a tired paralegal, barely reviewed. But Elijah had written it himself. It was a single sentence. Should the founder resume controlling interest and should the company demonstrably deviate from its foundational mission, said founder shall possess unilateral authority to implement a permanent cultural override. It wasn't legal poetry, but it was binding. He brought it to the next board review. No presentation. No flair. Just a page placed carefully before the remaining executives. The boardroom had changed. Several seats were filled with new faces, engineers, analysts, community leads elected from within the company after Elijah dissolved the old structure. They weren't there to argue. They were there to listen. He began, not with demands, with a story. The early days, the crashes, the silence after funding rejections. The first time a client told him his platform saved their family business. He didn't use numbers. He used memory, and memory proved ownership. Then he turned to the clause. Explained its intent, not as a threat, as a promise, that the company would never again forget its roots. That profit wouldn't come at the cost of purpose. That the people at the heart of it, the staff, the users, the unseen contributors, would never again be treated as disposable. He proposed a permanent cultural charter. Not a mission statement. A governance document. Reviewed quarterly by internal representatives, voted on anonymously, enforced independently. Violations wouldn't mean PR disasters. They'd mean internal reckoning. Realignment. Healing. There was silence. Then, the youngest member of the board, a junior engineer with no corporate polish, no history in meetings like this, raised her hand. She asked if he trusted the company to uphold it without him. Elijah looked out the window for a long moment, then answered by pulling a manila folder from his bag. Inside, a letter of transition. He had written it 2 months earlier. He wasn't staying. Not because he didn't care, but because legacy wasn't meant to be held. It was meant to be planted. He named no successor, because the system didn't need one. The people were ready. He stood, walked once more through the office, past the new common areas redesigned from his old sketches, past the wall where the original mission statement had been hand-painted, billed for the ones no one sees. He reached the exit, turned once, and for the first time in years smiled fully. Not because he won, because he finished. There was no press release, no gala, no send-off wrapped in glittering language and catered nostalgia. Elijah left the company the way he had entered it, quietly on his own terms, without the permission or approval of anyone else. The nameplate outside the boardroom was removed before sunrise. His profile on the website disappeared without fanfare. Interns noticed first, then middle managers. By the time the board met the next week, he was already gone, but not absent. The culture was still warm from his presence. And that warmth wasn't in titles or signage. It was in the structure, the rhythms, the behavior of people who had once operated in fear but now worked in rhythm with purpose. Departments functioned not through chains of command but through accountability webs. The product roadmap no longer depended on top-down demands but input loops that began with users. He had built permanence, and then stepped away. Not far. Just enough. A month after his departure, someone noticed a new grant program had appeared on the internal platform, seed capital for employees who wanted to leave and start their own ventures. Anonymous funding. No strings. The only line on the application form was, "What are you building and why does it matter?" The money came from a blind trust. But they all knew. Elijah had always believed the next great thing wasn't his. It was theirs. At the company's annual community summit, a tradition that had once been an elite investor soiree and was now an open, live-streamed forum, someone left an empty chair on the main stage with a hand-drawn E taped to the back. No one acknowledged it. They didn't need to. By the second quarter, employee-led initiatives outpaced executive directives. Productivity rose. So did retention. So did joy. A ripple formed outside the building, too. Competitors tried to mimic the model, but without memory, their movements felt hollow. Elijah's absence only made his work more visible, because what he left behind wasn't a blueprint. It was belief. In a world so often obsessed with founders who hoard the throne, Elijah had reminded them that true leadership is letting go before anyone asks. A junior designer found a note in a back drawer, scrawled on notebook paper yellowed with time. "Founders don't stay. They plant. If I'm still here when it blooms, I failed." No signature. It didn't need one. Elsewhere, far from the city, Elijah spent his mornings in silence, watching the sea from a hillside home with no nameplate. He tended a small garden, helped local kids learn basic programming in a community center with broken Wi-Fi. Sometimes someone recognized him, asked him what it felt like to walk away from everything he built. He always gave the same answer. "I didn't walk away. I stepped aside, so it could keep growing." And when he returned to the city once, anonymously, he stood across from the building he once founded. Now brighter, fuller, more human. He smiled, not because his name was still on the paperwork, but because it wasn't needed anymore. He had started the story, and left just in time for everyone else to write the ending.